My name is Sydney, and I am 34 years old. I work as a senior wealth manager at a top-tier financial firm in New York. I had just finished a grueling 14-hour shift managing 8-figure portfolios when my phone lit up with a notification from the family group chat. My mother had sent a message declaring that 30 of our relatives would be taking over my private lake house this weekend. My father chimed in with a grocery list demanding Wagyu beef and imported liquor, telling me to sleep at a motel so the actual family could have enough space. When I typed a simple and firm no, my mother responded with a barrage of laughing emojis. She told me they were coming anyway and warned me not to embarrass them. They thought I was bluffing. They had no idea that by Saturday morning they would be staring at an empty construction site surrounded by police cars. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to set a hard boundary with toxic relatives who felt entitled to your success. It was Wednesday night, and I was sitting at my kitchen island staring blindly at the city lights outside my penthouse windows. Closing out a massive quarterly portfolio for my high net worth clients always left me mentally and physically drained. I just wanted a hot shower and a full night of uninterrupted sleep. Instead, my phone began vibrating continuously against the marble countertop. The screen displayed 20 new messages in the Wilson family chat. I sighed and opened the application, immediately greeted by a massive block of text from my mother, Pamela. "Great news, everyone," she wrote. To celebrate Brittany getting her massive promotion, we are hosting a 5-day luxury family reunion at the Rhode Island Lake House starting this Saturday. Everyone pack your swimsuits. The anger flared in my chest, instantly hot and sharp. The Rhode Island Lake House belonged entirely to me. I had purchased it 2 years ago using my own corporate bonuses and a heavily negotiated mortgage. I had never offered to host a family reunion, let alone a 5-day vacation for 30 people. Before I could even formulate a response, my father Thomas sent a follow-up message. "Sydney, we need you to head up there by Friday night. Make sure the fridge is fully stocked. I have attached a list. We expect Wagyu beef ribeyes, premium vodka, and enough fresh seafood for a clam bake. Oh, and since the house only has 4 bedrooms, you need to book yourself a room at that cheap motel out on the highway. We need all the main house beds so the real family has enough space to be comfortable." My hands physically shook as I read the absurd and disrespectful demands from my father. This was the exact dynamic that had defined my entire existence within this family unit. I was the financial safety net, the unpaid event planner, and the perpetual scapegoat. I was never treated as a guest or an equal. I was just the staff expected to facilitate their perfect moments from the shadows. I placed my coffee mug down carefully, took a deep breath to center myself, and typed a single-word response: "No." The group chat fell completely silent for a solid 3 minutes. Then my younger sister, Brittany, launched her inevitable attack. "Do not be such a jealous spinster, Sid." She typed her words dripping with her usual entitlement. "Mom and Dad paid the deposit for your apartment, so the least you can do is let us use your empty vacation house to celebrate my success. Stop being so bitter just because you are alone and have no one to share things with." The audacity of her statement was suffocating. Brittany was the undisputed golden child of the Wilson family. She had spent her entire life coasting on the financial sacrifices of my parents while I had to scrape and fight for every single thing I owned. I did not hold back my response. I typed furiously, hitting send before I could second-guess my own boundaries. "They paid the deposit for your apartment, Brittany. I am still paying off $80,000 in student loans because Mom and Dad decided to buy you a brand new Lexus for your college graduation instead of helping me with my tuition. The Rhode Island house is my property. I pay the mortgage. I pay the property taxes. You are not welcome there this weekend, and neither is anyone else." I watched the read receipts pop up at the bottom of the screen. I knew my response was harsh, but it was the absolute undeniable truth. I waited for the explosion of anger from my father or the manipulative tears from my sister. Instead, my mother Pamela sent 4 laughing, crying emojis. "You are so dramatic, Sydney," she replied, completely ignoring the boundary I had just explicitly established. "We are arriving Saturday at 10 in the morning. Have the keys under the mat and the groceries put away. Do not embarrass us in front of your aunts and uncles." I stared at the screen, feeling a cold wave of realization wash over me. They genuinely believed I had no power to stop them. They viewed my property as their property, and my success as a communal asset they could exploit at their convenience. I did not waste my breath arguing further. I closed the messaging application and put the group chat on mute. I walked over to the sink to pour out the rest of my cold coffee, knowing that any further text messages would just be a waste of energy. I was just turning on the faucet when my phone began ringing. The caller ID displayed the name Jamal. Jamal was the husband of Brittany. He was an African-American man who loved to play the role of a high-rolling luxury real estate broker on social media platforms. His online profile was filled with rented sports cars and photos taken in front of mansions he did not actually own. In reality, he was a spectacularly unsuccessful agent who leeched off my parents to maintain his flashy lifestyle. I had never liked him, and he had always treated me with a barely concealed layer of arrogance. I answered the call without saying a single word. Sydney listened to me carefully. Jamal said, his voice low and threatening, devoid of his usual fake charm. "You are not going to ruin the celebration of my wife with your attitude. We promised her family a getaway, and we will deliver it. You need to stop acting like a spoiled brat and do what your parents told you to do." I leaned against the kitchen counter, pressing the phone to my ear. "Is that right, Jamal?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously calm and steady. "That is exactly right," he snapped back. "Do not play games with us, Sydney. We are going to that house on Saturday whether you like it or not. You cannot keep us out." I smiled a cold, hard smile that he could not see. "I am a wealth manager, Jamal. I deal in hard facts and legally binding contracts, not empty threats and family guilt trips. I do not care what you promised Brittany or my parents. You have no legal right to step foot on my property." Jamal scoffed, a harsh sound of derision echoing through the phone speaker. "You think you can intimidate me with your corporate jargon? You are just a sad, lonely woman sitting in a quiet apartment. Brittany deserves this weekend. She earned her promotion, and we are going to celebrate it at the lake house. If you do not leave the keys, I will just call a locksmith and have the doors opened myself. We are family, and that means we have a right to be there." I gripped the edge of the marble counter, my knuckles turning white. "You listen to me very closely, Jamal. If you or anyone else in that deluded family attempts to set foot on my Rhode Island property this weekend, you will face severe legal consequences. I am not playing the role of the obedient scapegoat anymore. This conversation is over." I ended the call before he could utter another arrogant word. My heart was pounding, but my mind was completely clear. They thought they could bully their way into my sanctuary simply because we shared DNA. They thought my refusal was just a temporary roadblock they could easily bulldoze over. They were completely wrong. I was going to teach them a lesson they would never forget: boundaries and the destruction that follows when you push the wrong person too far. The game had officially changed, and I held all the winning cards. The screen of my phone lit up, cutting through the dim lighting of my kitchen. The name Jamal flashed across the glass in bright white letters. I did not answer immediately. I let it ring 3 times, watching the device vibrate against the cold marble countertop. I finally slid my finger across the screen to accept the call. I did not say hello. I just waited in complete silence. Jamal did not bother with pleasantries either. His voice came through the speaker, dripping with that manufactured arrogant confidence he used in his fake real estate videos. He told me I needed to stop acting like a petulant child. He said my jealousy over Brittany getting a promotion was tearing the entire family apart. I remained perfectly quiet, letting him fill the empty space with his own inflated ego. Jamal then shifted into his professional broker persona. He cleared his throat loudly and told me he had reviewed the Homeowners Association bylaws for my lake house community. According to his brilliant legal mind, because my mother, Pamela, was listed as a secondary emergency contact for the neighborhood gate security, she had a legal right of entry to the premises. He actually used the phrase legal right of entry as if he were quoting a binding Supreme Court ruling. I poured myself a glass of iced water while he talked, listening to the ice clink against the glass. He explained that my mother could authorize any guests she wanted. He said the HOA board would completely back them up if I tried to cause trouble or deny them access. He then lowered his voice, trying to sound pitying and condescending. He told me that being a bitter, lonely woman was no excuse to ruin my sister's happiness. He said Brittany deserved this luxury weekend because she actually worked hard and had a real family to celebrate with. He told me to just leave the keys under the mat and disappear for a few days so normal people could enjoy the house in peace. I took a slow, methodical sip of my water. As a senior wealth manager, I handled hostile negotiations with corporate raiders and aggressive hedge fund managers on a weekly basis. A fake real estate broker driving a leased car was not going to intimidate me. I did not yell. I did not raise my voice. I dealt strictly in facts and leverage. Jamal. I said, my voice completely void of emotion. Before you start giving out fake legal advice, you should probably check the lease on that luxury downtown apartment you and Brittany live in. I heard a sudden sharp intake of breath on his end of the line. The bravado slipped for a fraction of a second before he caught himself. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his tone losing its practiced smoothness and edging into genuine panic. I pulled up a secure PDF document on my computer screen. "The CO signer for your lease just officially withdrew her name today," I told him, delivering the information like a corporate death sentence. "You and Brittany do not make enough combined income to qualify for that penthouse. The leasing office requires a guarantor who makes 40 times the monthly rent. Since I just filed the paperwork to remove myself as your financial backer, you are in violation of your lease agreement." Jamal scoffed loudly right into the microphone, trying to mask his fear with outrage. He called me a bluffing loser. He said my parents would just co-sign for them if I was actually petty enough to do that. He told me I was pathetic for trying to scare him with fake financial threats. "Listen to me very closely, Sydney," he barked, his voice rising in volume. "We are driving up on Saturday morning. If you try to change the locks, I will just hire a locksmith and have the doors opened myself. I have your mother's authorization to be on the property. Do not try to fight us on this. You will lose." He hung up the phone with a sharp, violent click, leaving a dead tone echoing in my quiet apartment. I stared at my phone for a long moment, analyzing his response. He actually thought he had won. He thought a changed lock was my only line of defense against a family of entitled narcissists. He believed I was just a stubborn sister throwing a desperate tantrum. I smiled coldly, setting my glass down on the counter. Changing the locks was a tactic for absolute amateurs. I opened my contacts and dialed Marcus. Marcus was the lead commercial contractor I used for flipping high-end properties across the eastern seaboard. We had already mapped out a massive studs-to-the-studs gut renovation for the Rhode Island lake house. It was originally scheduled to begin next month after the summer season officially ended. Marcus answered on the second ring, the sound of loud machinery and shouting workers echoing in the background of his call. "I need to expedite the Rhode Island project," I told him immediately, skipping any introductory small talk. "I need the demolition to start tomorrow morning at sunrise." Marcus let out a low, heavy sigh. "Sydney, that is completely impossible," he said. "My crews are booked solid this week. We have to pull the final permit, stage the heavy equipment, and set up the safety perimeters. I cannot just drop everything and tear a house apart with 12 hours of notice." I opened my banking application on my second monitor, navigating to my primary checking account. "I will wire you a $10,000 premium right now," I offered. "Cash. Today. I need a full crew on that property by 6 in the morning. I need the roof completely torn off. I need the plumbing gutted. I need the drywall ripped out to the framing. And Marcus, this is the most important part. I need you to drop 4 bright blue porta potties right in the middle of the driveway. I want them blocking the main walkway to the front porch." I heard the sound of a keyboard clacking rapidly on his end of the line. $10,000, he repeated. I could hear the gears turning in his head, weighing the logistics against the massive payout. For 10 grand, I can pull my guys off the commercial site in Providence for 2 days. I will get the heavy machinery loaded on the flatbeds tonight. We will start tearing the roof off at exactly 6 in the morning. I thanked him and wired the funds immediately, watching the confirmation screen flash green. The $10,000 was a steep price to pay, but considering it would serve as the ultimate destruction of my family's entitlement, it was the best investment I had ever made. I spent the rest of my evening organizing my client files, completely unbothered by the fact that my parents and sister were busy packing their designer bags for a luxury weekend that no longer existed. Friday evening arrived with a heavy rainstorm sweeping across the city, battering my penthouse windows. I was sitting on my velvet sofa, enjoying a glass of expensive red wine, when my phone chimed loudly. It was a motion alert ping from the temporary security cameras Marcus had installed around the perimeter of the Rhode Island property. I opened the application and tapped on the live high-definition camera feed. The demolition crew had worked with ruthless, spectacular efficiency. Phase 1 was completely finished. The beautiful million-dollar lake house was gone. In its place stood a hazardous, dangerous, roofless shell. The elegant cedar siding had been ripped away, leaving only raw wooden studs exposed to the elements. Mountains of shattered drywall, splintered wood, and twisted metal pipes filled the front yard. Bright yellow caution tape wrapped tightly around the remaining support beams, flapping wildly in the wind. Just as I had requested, a tall, heavy-duty chain-link fence now surrounded the entire property, secured with a massive steel padlock. And right in the center of the crushed gravel driveway, sitting exactly where my father usually parked his luxury sedan, were 4 massive plastic porta-potties. The trap was perfectly set. My family was expecting a 5-star resort experience. They were expecting a fully stocked refrigerator, freshly made beds, and a relaxing weekend by the water. Instead, they were going to drive 5 hours straight into an active commercial demolition site. I locked my phone screen and took a slow, satisfying sip of my wine. Jamal had promised he would break in if I locked the doors. I could not wait to see how his fake real estate law degree would handle a fenced-off construction zone heavily monitored by high-definition security cameras recording every second of their arrival. The next morning would finally bring a brutal reality check to their boundless entitlement. Saturday morning arrived with clear skies. I sat at the custom oak dining table in my penthouse, wrapped in a silk robe with coffee in my hand. I synced the security cameras from the Rhode Island property directly to my smart television. The high-definition feed displayed the sprawling wooded driveway leading up to my land. At 10, the motion sensors triggered notifications on my tablet. I leaned back as the live footage sharpened into perfect focus. A convoy of 8 vehicles began rolling down the private gravel road. Leading the pack was the leased white Lexus SUV my parents had essentially bankrupted themselves to buy for Brittany. Following behind were minivans and luxury crossovers packed to the brim with aunts, uncles, and cousins who had bought into the delusion. I watched as 30 distinct relatives piled out of their vehicles, stretching their legs and popping trunks to unload mountains of luggage. They dragged expensive hard-shell suitcases, rolling coolers filled with the premium liquor my father demanded, and inflatable water toys for a lake they were never going to touch. Brittany stepped out of the Lexus wearing an oversized sun hat and a designer beach cover-up, posing as if stepping onto a red carpet. Jamal exited the driver's side wearing mirrored aviator sunglasses, stretching his arms wide like a conquering king, claiming his new territory. My mother Pamela emerged holding a clipboard likely filled with the schedule of events she expected me to cater. She was shouting orders at my cousins, directing them on where to place bags. They were completely oblivious to what waited just around the bend of the long driveway. I took a slow sip of coffee as the crowd began their march up the final stretch of the gravel path. The camera tracked their movement as they rounded the corner of dense pine trees. I watched in satisfaction as 30 jaws dropped simultaneously. The joyous vacation chatter vanished, replaced by a stunned silence that the microphones picked up with crystal clarity. The magnificent lake house they had planned to commandeer was entirely gone. In its place stood a towering skeletal frame of raw yellow pine wood. The elegant wraparound porch had been ripped away, leaving gaping holes in the foundation. Mountains of crushed drywall and shattered tiles formed ugly hills across what used to be a pristine front lawn. Thick electrical wires hung from the exposed ceiling joists, swaying like dead vines in the breeze. A heavy-duty chain-link fence encircled the perimeter, creating an impenetrable barricade of steel mesh. Sitting right in the center of the walkway, blocking any path to the front door, were the 4 blue porta-potties I had requested. They stood like plastic sentinels guarding the ruins of my property. I turned up the volume on my television just as the absolute horror set in. Brittany dropped her designer beach bag directly into a muddy puddle. She ripped off her sun hat and stared at the gutted framing with her mouth hanging wide open. Aunt Susan, clutching a tray of homemade potato salad, let out a loud gasp of sheer confusion. The younger cousins stopped dead in their tracks, staring at the heavy machinery parked on the torn-up grass. The sheer magnitude of the destruction was impossible to process. They had expected a luxury weekend retreat and were instead greeted by a hazardous industrial wasteland. My phone began ringing violently against the marble countertop. The caller ID flashed with my father. I let it ring 3 times, savoring the harsh buzzing, before I accepted the call and put it on speakerphone. "What the hell did you do?" Thomas screamed into the receiver. His voice was so loud and laced with absolute rage that the audio clipped and distorted through the phone speaker. I sat perfectly still, watching his red face on the screen as he paced frantically in front of the locked chain-link fence. "Where is the house, Sydney? Where is the damn house?" He was losing his mind. I could hear the panicked murmurs of relatives buzzing in the background. My uncles were demanding answers while my aunts tried to corral the crying children away from the debris. Before I could formulate a response, I heard a physical struggle over the phone. Pamela snatched the device out of his hand. "You malicious psychopath!" she wailed, her voice echoing across the construction site. "You destroyed $1 million asset just to ruin the weekend of your sister. You are sick in the head, Sydney. You are a cold-blooded monster." I watched her on the live feed, stomping her feet in the gravel, pointing an accusing finger at the security camera mounted on the utility pole, as if she could see me through the lens. "You knew we were coming," she shrieked. "You knew we invited the entire family to celebrate Brittany. How are we supposed to host a reunion in a garbage dump? You have humiliated us in front of everyone. Fix this right now, or I swear to God you will never step foot in our family home again." Her threats were completely empty and utterly meaningless. I kept my voice perfectly flat and measured deliberately, stripping away any emotion. "I told you no," I replied. The words cut through her hysterical screaming with icy precision. "I told you clearly you were not welcome on my property. You decided to ignore my boundaries and trespass on an active commercial construction site. I did not destroy $1 million asset, Mom. I expedited a planned renovation because I refuse to allow you to treat my investments like your personal playground." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy with fury. I watched my mother staring at her phone screen, unable to process the fact that I had outsmarted her. "I am not going to fix anything," I continued, my tone dropping to a dangerous whisper. "The demolition crew will be back on Monday morning. You and your 30 guests are currently standing in a hazardous liability zone. I highly suggest you grab your expensive bags and leave my property immediately before one of you steps on a rusty nail and requires a tetanus shot. I am not paying for your medical bills, and I am certainly not paying for your vacation." My father grabbed the phone back from my mother, his face purple with absolute rage. "You listen to me, you ungrateful brat," he started to yell, but I simply ended the call. I was completely done listening to their demands. I set my phone down and leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, watching the chaos unfold live on my television screen. The relatives were becoming restless. They were hot, tired, and extremely angry that their promised luxury vacation was a total scam. The low rumbling of 30 disgruntled family members began to turn into a full-blown mutiny. Uncle Gary threw his cooler back into his minivan, shaking his head in disgust. Aunt Susan crossed her arms and began yelling at my mother, demanding why they had driven 5 hours for a construction site. Pamela and Thomas were drowning in the public humiliation they fought so hard to avoid. Brittany was sobbing dramatically against the side of the Lexus, playing the victim for all it was worth. But Jamal could not let his fragile ego take a public beating. To save face in front of the murmuring relatives, he puffed out his chest and marched to the center of the gravel driveway. "Do not panic, everyone!" he yelled, waving his arms to command their attention. He flashed that fake, arrogant smile I absolutely despised. "I know real estate law," he announced confidently. His voice boomed through the microphone feed. "The main structure might be under construction, but the backyard patio and the lake access are completely separate easements. They remain perfectly intact." He pointed a finger toward the back of the property, where the stone fire pit and the boat dock remained untouched by the demolition crew. "We will just camp out in the backyard and barbecue," he declared. "We brought enough food and liquor to last for days. It is a beautiful weekend for camping anyway." My father looked unsure, but Jamal slapped him on the back with false bravado. "Trust me, Thomas," he said loudly. "Sydney is just trying to scare us off. She will not dare call the cops on her own blood. She does not have the guts." With a triumphant smirk, Jamal walked over to his heavily financed pickup truck. He opened the specialized toolbox in the truck bed and pulled out massive, heavy-duty steel bolt cutters. The crowd of relatives watched in stunned silence as he marched directly up to the contractor chain-link fence. He gripped the thick handles of the bolt cutters and positioned the sharp blades right over the heavy metal padlock securing the main gate. He was determined to break in and claim fake victory. The heavy steel jaws of the bolt cutters clamped down. Jamal squeezed the handles together with a loud grunt. A metallic snap echoed across the driveway as the padlock broke in half and fell to the dirt. Jamal grinned, kicking the chain-link gate open. He turned around to face the crowd, expecting applause. He expected them to treat him like the hero who saved the family vacation. Instead, his smug smile vanished the instant his foot crossed the threshold of the property line. A deafening 120-decibel construction siren erupted from the utility pole. The piercing mechanical wail ripped through the quiet Rhode Island air, vibrating in their chests. Red strobe lights mounted on the scaffolding began flashing wildly, painting their shocked faces in harsh warning colors. The automated security protocol of Marcus had been perfectly triggered. Jamal dropped the bolt cutters in sheer panic, covering his ears. Brittany screamed, dropping her designer sunglasses into the mud. The younger cousins scrambled backward, hiding behind their parents. The entire convoy of relatives froze in terror as the siren echoed across the lake. Thomas stepped forward, trying to salvage his crumbling patriarch persona. He waved his hands frantically at the crowd, yelling over the blaring alarm. "Everyone stay calm," he ordered, attempting to project authority. "It is just a faulty security system. Sydney probably forgot to turn it off. I will call her and have her disable it." He pulled out his phone, but before he could dial, a new terrifying sound pierced through the noise. It was the high-pitched wail of police sirens approaching fast from the main highway. The automated contractor system had not just triggered a local alarm. It had dispatched local law enforcement directly to the site of the breach. Within 7 minutes, the roar of heavy police engines tore down the private driveway. 3 local sheriff cruisers flew into the compound with their tires skidding and kicking up clouds of white dust. They boxed in the 8-car convoy of my family, blocking any chance of escape. The flashing blue and red police lights reflected off the skeletal remains of my house. 4 uniformed officers stepped out of their vehicles immediately. Their hands rested firmly on their utility belts, and their expressions were entirely devoid of patience. The lead officer, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a stern jawline, walked toward the broken gate. He took one look at the severed padlock in the dirt and locked his eyes on Jamal. Jamal immediately took 3 steps backward, holding his hands up in a gesture of surrender. My father, Thomas, rushed forward, blocking the officer from reaching Jamal. Thomas smoothed down the front of his expensive golf polo, putting on his best, respectable businessman smile. He believed his social status and age could smooth over any legal situation. "Officer, there is no need for all this commotion," Thomas said, projecting his voice over the dying whine of the security siren. The police had manually cut the alarm from an external control box, but the tension remained incredibly high. "This is simply a family misunderstanding," Thomas continued, gesturing broadly to the 30 relatives clustered near the parked vehicles. "My daughter Sydney owns this property. We are just here to have a family barbecue for the weekend. The alarm was an accident. We are sorry for the inconvenience, but you can head back to the station now." The lead officer did not smile back. He did not relax his posture or accept the explanation. He pulled a heavy radio from his shoulder strap. "Dispatch, run a property verification on this address," he requested, keeping his eyes fixed on my father. "Verify current ownership and check for active development permits." Thomas chuckled nervously, looking back at Pamela, who was gripping her designer handbag so tightly her knuckles were white. "Officer, I assure you, my daughter owns this land," Thomas reiterated, his voice taking on an edge of arrogant annoyance. "I can call her right now and she will tell you to leave. She is just throwing a tantrum because she is jealous of her sister. We have every right to be standing here." The officer ignored him completely, waiting in silence as the radio crackled heavily with static. A voice from dispatch responded a moment later. The audio broadcast clear across the quiet dirt driveway for every single relative to hear. "Ownership verified, the operator confirmed. The property is registered to a commercial entity named Vanguard Holdings, LLC. Active commercial demolition permits are on file. The corporate owner has explicitly filed a zero-tolerance trespassing and vandalism mandate with the county. All unauthorized entries require immediate prosecution and arrest." The smug smile instantly vanished from the face of my father. Pamela gasped, taking a step backward as the reality of the situation crashed violently into her. Thomas stammered, his mouth opening and closing like a fish as he tried to process the legal reality. "Vanguard Holdings," he repeated, his voice trembling. "No, that cannot be right. My daughter Sydney bought this house. She told us she bought it." The lead officer stepped closer to Thomas. "Sir, this property is not owned by your daughter," the officer stated firmly. "It is owned by a corporate holding company. Legally, you are not visiting the vacation home of a relative. You are a group of unauthorized individuals breaking and entering into an active commercial development site. And the corporate owner of this site has instructed us to arrest anyone who breaches the perimeter." The humiliation was absolute. Thomas and Pamela were entirely stunned into silence. They had spent the last 2 years bragging to their friends about the beautiful lake house their daughter bought, acting as if they owned it by extension. They had promised 30 relatives a free luxury vacation based on their perceived authority over my life. They never realized I had purchased the estate through a corporate entity to shield my assets. I had built a legal fortress around my property, and they had just marched right into the trap. Brittany began to hyperventilate, clutching the arm of Jamal. "Dad, do something," she whined, looking frantically between the police officers and the relatives. "Tell them to leave us alone. Jamal, you are a real estate broker. Tell them this is illegal." Jamal looked terrified. The fake confidence he projected over the phone evaporated in the face of actual legal consequences. He tried to slowly inch his way back toward the crowd, attempting to blend in. The lead officer shifted his attention from my father to Jamal. He pointed a rigid finger at the heavy metal tool resting near the feet of my brother-in-law. "You in the mirrored sunglasses," the officer barked. "Step forward right now." Jamal froze, his eyes darting wildly. "I did not do anything," he lied. "We are just guests here. Her father told me to open the gate." He pointed directly at Thomas, throwing my father under the bus. Thomas let out a shout of indignant betrayal, but the officer was not interested in their toxic dynamics. The officer pointed to the severed lock in the dirt. "I saw you holding those bolt cutters when we pulled up," he said. "Step away from the crowd and put your hands on the hood of the cruiser. You are under arrest for destruction of private property and commercial trespassing." Jamal shook his head vigorously, refusing to comply. No, wait, you do not understand, he pleaded. My wife got a massive promotion. We have a legal right of entry. I read the Homeowners Association bylaws myself. You cannot arrest me for opening a gate. The two backup officers immediately stepped forward, moving with precision. They grabbed Jamal firmly by the arms, spinning him around and slamming him against the police cruiser. The harsh click of steel handcuffs echoed across the driveway, sealing his fate. Brittany let out a piercing scream, crying out for her husband as he was detained. Pamela began to sob heavily, burying her face in her hands as the public embarrassment overwhelmed her. Thomas stood paralyzed, stripped of all his patriarchal power, looking like a foolish old man in front of his extended family. They had come to exploit my property and assert their dominance over my boundaries. Instead, they were standing in a pile of construction rubble, watching their son-in-law get handcuffed like a common criminal. The 30 relatives who had followed them blindly into this disaster watched the scene in horrified silence. The illusion of the perfect, wealthy Wilson family was completely shattered. They realized they were stranded at a commercial demolition site surrounded by police with no place to sleep and no food to eat. The silence broke abruptly. A new furious voice erupted from the back of the crowd, slicing through the sound of Brittany crying. It was Aunt Susan pushing her way to the front of the group, her face bright red with absolute fury. Aunt Susan marched past the stunned police officers and the handcuffed Jamal. She kicked a piece of shattered drywall out of her path. Her face was flushed with an anger so intense it rivaled the flashing cherry lights of the police cruisers. She dropped her heavy leather weekender bag right in the middle of the dirt driveway. It landed with a heavy thud, sending up a small cloud of dust. "What do you mean we have to leave?" Susan demanded, pointing a trembling finger directly at my mother. Pamela shrank back, clutching her designer purse against her chest like a shield. Susan took another step forward, closing the distance between them. "You told us this was an exclusive family retreat," Susan yelled, her voice echoing off the skeletal framing of the gutted house. "You looked me in the eye at church last Sunday and said you had secured a private resort experience. Pamela, you charged every single family here $1,500 for a VIP weekend package. Where is my money?" The collective gasp from the remaining 29 relatives was audible even through my security camera microphones. The police officers exchanged bewildered looks. They had responded to a trespassing call and had suddenly found themselves in the middle of a massive family extortion scheme. The lead officer took a step back, crossing his arms over his Kevlar vest, content to let this particular domestic dispute play out before intervening again. Thomas tried to step in front of Pamela to play the protector, but Susan shoved him aside with surprising force. "Do not you dare try to silence me, Thomas," she barked. "You collected cash from my checking account for a luxury lakeside experience. I am currently standing in a demolition zone watching my nephew get arrested. I want my money back right this second." I sat in my penthouse hundreds of miles away, watching the absolute chaos unfold on my smart television. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. A cold smile stretched across my face. The sheer audacity of my parents was staggering. They had not just planned to hijack my property, they had actively monetized my stolen assets to swindle our extended family. I reached out and tapped the microphone icon on my camera control application. I unmuted the two-way security speaker mounted on the utility pole right above their heads. "Wait," I said, projecting my voice into the microphone. The high-definition speakers blasted my voice across the dusty yard, cutting through the humid Rhode Island air. "Mom, you charged our relatives to stay at my house." The entire crowd froze. 30 pairs of eyes snapped upward, scanning the utility poles and construction scaffolding, trying to locate the source of my disembodied voice. Pamela gasped loudly, clapping a hand over her mouth. Her eyes darted wildly around the yard like a trapped animal. Thomas looked up at the camera lens, his face draining of all color. He finally realized that I was watching every single humiliating second of their downfall. "Sydney," Pamela stammered, addressing the sky. "Sydney, please, we can explain this. It is a massive misunderstanding. We were just collecting a small contribution for the catering budget." A small contribution, I echoed, my voice booming through the speakers. $1,500 per family is not a grocery run, Mom. That is commercial extortion. Brittany, seeing her carefully constructed facade crumbling to dust, immediately resorted to her favorite defense mechanism. She started crying fake theatrical tears. She threw her hands in the air and sobbed loudly, trying to draw the attention and sympathy of the crowd back to her. It was a reservation fee, Brittany wailed, wiping invisible tears from her perfectly contoured cheeks. It was just for the gourmet food deliveries and the luxury boat rentals. We wanted to make sure everyone had a premium experience to celebrate my promotion. We were trying to do something nice for the family. Her performance might have worked on any other day, but the relatives were currently standing in the middle of a destroyed lawn, surrounded by heavy machinery and police cruisers. The illusion of premium luxury was completely shattered by the 4 bright blue porta-potties sitting right behind her. Aunt Susan glared at Brittany with pure, unfiltered disgust. "Do not insult my intelligence, Brittany," she snapped. "You do not rent boats in October, and you certainly do not need a reservation fee to stay at a house your sister supposedly owned. You lied to us. You all lied to us." Pamela desperately tried to shush Susan, waving her hands frantically and gesturing toward the police officers who were watching the exchange with keen professional interest. "Susan, keep your voice down," Pamela hissed in a panicked whisper. "The authorities are right here. We can settle this privately. We will sort out the finances when we get back home. Just get in your cars and drive away quietly before you make the situation any worse than it already is." But the damage was permanently done. The dam had broken, and the relatives were not going to be silenced by the frantic embarrassment of my mother. The crowd of aunts, uncles, and cousins turned on Pamela and Thomas with the ruthless efficiency of a betrayed mob. They realized simultaneously that they had been entirely conned. They had not been invited to a joyous celebration of familial success. They had been recruited as paying customers to fund a hijacked vacation. Uncle Gary slammed his hand down on the hood of his minivan. "I paid you $3,000 for my family of 4, Gary shouted, pointing aggressively at Thomas. "You told me that covered private chefs and premium alcohol. I want my $3,000 back right now, Thomas. Hand it over." Cousin Mark pushed his way to the front, joining Aunt Susan. "I canceled a weekend shift at the hospital for this," Mark yelled. "I sent you $1,500 through Zelle 2 weeks ago. Transfer it back, Pamela. Right here in the driveway. Get your phone out and send it back." The demands multiplied rapidly. Relatives pulled out their smartphones, opening their banking applications and holding their screens up as proof of payment. They surrounded Pamela and Thomas, forming a tight, angry circle in the dirt. "Zelle me my money back right now," Susan demanded, stepping so close to my mother that Pamela had to retreat against the side of the leased Lexus. "Send the Venmo," Thomas Gary shouted from the other side. "Do not pretend your phone has no service. Transfer the funds immediately, or I will file a police report for theft right in front of these officers." The irony was absolutely exquisite. Thomas had tried to use his respectable patriarch persona to brush off the police just 10 minutes ago. Now he was trapped against a luxury vehicle, begging his own siblings not to file formal fraud charges against him. The lead police officer leaned against his cruiser, crossing his arms and shaking his head. He had no intention of intervening in a civil financial dispute among relatives. He was just there to ensure nobody trespassed on my commercial property. Pamela was hyperventilating, digging through her designer purse with trembling hands, while Thomas stared blankly at the angry faces of his family members. They were completely cornered with nowhere to run and no lies left to spin. I watched the pathetic scramble on my television screen. My parents were desperately tapping at their phones, pretending they were trying to process the massive refunds. But I knew the absolute truth about their financial situation. They did not have the cash. They had never had the cash. I pressed my finger against the microphone button on my application one more time, ready to deliver the final lethal strike to their twisted web of lies. "They cannot refund you, Aunt Susan," I announced. My voice sliced through the chaotic shouting, silencing the angry mob instantly. Every single relative stopped yelling and looked up at the security camera. "You will not be getting your money back today, and you will not be getting it back tomorrow." Thomas clamped his hands over his ears as if trying to physically block out my words. Pamela squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the impact. Because Brittany did not get a promotion, I continued speaking slowly and clearly so every single person could absorb the truth. There is no new executive title. There is no massive corporate salary increase. In fact, Brittany and Jamal are completely dead broke. They are currently being evicted from their luxury apartment because I removed my financial backing. The collective gasp from the crowd echoed through the speakers. "Let us talk about where your $1,500 really went," I said, smiling into the quiet room. "Let us talk about the crushing debt my parents are hiding behind their perfectly tailored suits. We are going to discuss why they desperately needed your money." The audio from my security cameras captured the absolute pin-drop silence that fell over the dusty driveway. Even the local police officers who were previously looking bored and eager to wrap up a simple trespassing call had now stepped back and crossed their arms over their bulletproof vests. They recognized a major financial crime unraveling right in front of them, and they were more than happy to let me serve as the lead prosecutor via a utility pole loudspeaker. Jamal was still pressed against the hood of the police cruiser, with his hands cuffed tightly behind his back. The bravado had completely drained from his face, leaving only the pale, sweaty panic of a cornered con artist. As a senior wealth manager, I do not just manage money, I manage risk. I told the captive audience, my voice ringing with absolute authority. When Brittany announced she was marrying a highly successful real estate broker who somehow possessed zero verifiable assets, I decided to run a comprehensive background check. Standard protocol for protecting my own wealth from potential liabilities. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle over the 30 relatives who were hanging on to my every syllable. Jamal is not a successful broker. He is not a broker at all. His real estate license was officially suspended by the state licensing board exactly 6 months ago. Aunt Susan gasped so loudly I could hear it over the feed. Uncle Gary stepped closer to the speaker, his face hardening into a mask of pure anger. Jamal shook his head frantically against the metal hood of the police car. "She is lying," he yelled desperately, trying to salvage the last shreds of his dignity. "My license is just pending a routine administrative review. Do not listen to her." The State Regulatory Commission does not conduct routine administrative reviews for massive escrow fraud, I countered, my voice slicing through his pathetic defense like a scalpel. Jamal diverted client earnest money deposits into his personal checking account to cover his rapidly mounting debts. The state board caught the discrepancies, revoked his credentials, and flagged him for potential criminal prosecution. That is why he could not secure a traditional mortgage for that fancy downtown penthouse. That is why I had to co-sign the lease to keep him and my darling sister from living in a motel. Brittany snapped. The polished image of the flawless golden child she had maintained for 30 years was burning to the ground in high definition. "Shut up!" she screamed at the security camera, her face contorted in absolute rage. "Shut your jealous mouth, Sydney. You are just trying to humiliate us because you will die alone in your miserable city apartment. You have always been insanely jealous of me and my husband." I took a slow sip of my coffee, watching her stomp her designer boots in the dirt. Her hysterical screaming only confirmed exactly what I was saying. "Remember when I told Jamal I pulled my financial backing on your apartment?" I asked, directing my words specifically to my sister. "Let us clarify exactly what that means for your immediate living situation." The leasing office did not just remove my name from the guarantor file, they officially served your 3-day notice to vacate yesterday afternoon. You are exactly 4 months behind on your monthly rent payments. The leasing manager confirmed you have been ignoring their collection calls for 16 weeks. Brittany froze, her mouth hanging open. She looked at Jamal, seeking a denial, but he refused to meet her eyes, staring firmly at the gravel beneath the police cruiser. "You do not have an executive promotion, Brittany," I continued, relentlessly stripping away every layer of her carefully constructed fantasy. "You have an eviction notice tacked to your front door right now. By Tuesday morning, the local sheriff will physically remove whatever cheap furniture you have left and lock you out of the building. You are entirely dead broke. You do not even have the funds to pay for the gas required to drive that leased white Lexus back to the city. Pamela had heard enough. Her entire world was imploding in front of the very people she had spent her life trying to impress. She grabbed Thomas by the sleeve of his golf shirt, pulling him toward the passenger side of their vehicle. "We are leaving," Pamela announced, her voice trembling with panic and humiliation. "I will not stand here and listen to these vile, fabricated lies. Thomas, get in the car right now. We are going home." Thomas stumbled forward, looking completely disoriented, but the escape route was instantly blocked. Uncle Gary and Cousin Mark stepped directly in front of the car doors, crossing their arms. "You are not going anywhere." Pamela Gary growled, his voice deep and menacing. "You are going to stand right there and we are going to hear exactly why you stole our money." Pamela shrank back, terrified of her own brother. The sheer desperation radiating from my parents was palpable. They were trapped. "Let me explain the true motive behind this luxurious family retreat," I announced, my voice booming across the yard once again. Jamal did not just lose his job in his apartment. He developed a severe gambling addiction to cope with his failures. He owes exactly $45,000 to an illegal underground sports betting ring. I let the staggering number hang in the air. The relatives looked sick to their stomachs. Jamal could not get a legitimate bank loan because his credit is completely destroyed and he is under investigation for fraud. So his loan sharks gave him a final deadline to pay up or face severe physical consequences. Mom and Dad panicked. They could not let their precious golden child, Brittany, face the reality of being married to a destitute criminal. They could not let their social circle know their perfect daughter was about to be homeless, so they orchestrated this massive scam. They invented a fake promotion. They hijacked my private property, and they organized this retreat specifically to extort $1,500 from every single family standing in this driveway. They needed your hard-earned cash to pay off the loan sharks of Jamal and secure a new security deposit for an apartment Brittany could actually afford. You were not invited to a celebration. You were the targets of a desperate financial shakedown. The golden child illusion shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Brittany let out a guttural, devastating sob. She dropped straight to her knees in the mud, completely abandoning her pristine posture. She buried her face in her hands, crying real, agonizing tears, as the sheer magnitude of her ruined life finally crushed her. She had no money, no home, and a husband facing multiple criminal charges. The reality of her absolute failure was broadcasting live to the entire extended family. Thomas turned a sickly shade of pale gray. He clutched the left side of his chest with a trembling hand, leaning heavily against the hood of the white Lexus. He looked like he might actually faint from the overwhelming weight of the public embarrassment. His entire identity was built on projecting wealth, authority, and superiority. Now he was exposed as a desperate fraudster who actively conspired to rob his own siblings to cover up the crimes of his worthless son-in-law. He could not even look at his brothers or sisters. The shame was absolute and completely suffocating. The police officers, who had been listening silently to the entire confession broadcast, finally decided it was time to step in. The lead officer pulled out his notepad, looking directly at Pamela and Thomas. Aunt Susan, however, beat him to the punch. She spun around, her eyes blazing with a furious, righteous fire. She marched directly up to the lead sheriff, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at my trembling parents. "Officer, I want to press charges for wire fraud," Susan demanded, her voice ringing with absolute certainty. "They took my money across state lines under completely false pretenses. They lied about the venue, they lied about the services, and they actively colluded to steal from me. I have the digital receipts and the text messages proving their deception." The mood of the crowd instantly shifted from shock to aggressive vengeance. Uncle Gary raised his hand, stepping up beside Susan. "I am filing a report too," Gary shouted. "I transferred $3,000 to Pamela for services she never intended to provide." Cousin Mark nodded, pulling up his banking application to show the officers. "Mark me down as well." Mark agreed. They conned all of us to pay off an illegal gambling debt. I want them immediately arrested." The lead officer nodded gravely and keyed his shoulder radio, requesting 2 additional transport units to take multiple financial fraud statements. The extended family turned their backs on Pamela, leaving them completely isolated in their shattered deceit. I smiled, savoring the absolute justice. The steel handcuffs clicked around Jamal with a sharp finality. The officer did not waste a single second. "You have the right to remain silent." He recited, his voice a low, authoritative rumble that carried perfectly through my audio feed. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Jamal thrashed against the hood of the cruiser, his aviator sunglasses slipping down his nose. He looked absolutely pathetic. He twisted his neck frantically, searching for his wife. "Brittany," he pleaded, his voice cracking with genuine terror. "Brittany, you have to do something. Call my lawyer. Tell them this is a huge mistake. Please, Brittany, tell them." Brittany stood frozen for 2 seconds. She looked at the flashing police lights. She looked at the 30 furious relatives surrounding her. She looked at her husband pinned against the squad car, facing multiple felony charges. Her survival instinct kicked in. Realizing the ship was rapidly sinking, she immediately threw the man she married directly under the bus. "I had nothing to do with this," she shrieked, stepping away. "It was all his idea. He forced us to do it. He has a terrible gambling problem, and he manipulated me. I am just a victim in all of this. I did not know he was going to cut the lock. Please, officer, you cannot arrest me. I am pregnant." Brittany was absolutely not pregnant, but she had always used phantom medical emergencies to escape accountability. Jamal gasped, his eyes wide with betrayal as he stared at his wife. The sheer coldness of her pivot was breathtaking even to me. But Aunt Susan was absolutely not having it. She dropped her weekender bag in the dirt and marched straight up to the lead officer, completely ignoring the crocodile tears streaming down the face of my sister. Susan pulled her smartphone out of her pocket and aggressively shoved the glowing screen directly into the personal space of the officer. "No, she did not." Susan yelled, her voice vibrating with righteous indignation. "She is lying through her teeth. Look at this screen right now. Here are the text messages from Brittany sent directly to my phone last Tuesday. She explicitly guaranteed a luxury catered vacation with private boat tours if we wired the money directly to the checking account of Pamela." Susan began swiping violently through her message history, reading the texts aloud for the entire yard to hear. Brittany wrote that she secured a private chef for Saturday night, Susan read, pointing at the screen. She sent me a link to a luxury yacht rental service and told me my $1,500 covered unlimited premium alcohol. Does this look like the behavior of an innocent victim being manipulated by her husband? She was the primary sales pitch for this entire extortion scam. She knew exactly what she was doing. The backup cruisers arrived with a loud crunch of gravel, effectively sealing the perimeter of my property. 4 additional officers stepped out, pulling out thick legal pads. The chaotic demolition site instantly transformed into an active outdoor interrogation room. The police began taking formal sworn statements from 30 angry relatives right there on the demolished lawn. It was a spectacular display of absolute ruin. Cousins and aunts lined up eagerly to throw my parents to the wolves. They presented bank transfer receipts, Venmo confirmations, and printed emails proving the elaborate financial deception. Thomas stood near the front bumper of his leased Lexus, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his public destruction. For 30 years, my father had aggressively cultivated the persona of the successful, wealthy patriarch. He demanded respect at every family gathering. He talked down to his siblings, boasting about his flawless investments and his perfect golden child. He constantly belittled his brothers for driving older cars or taking modest vacations. Now he was reduced to a stammering, sweating mess. The crisp collar of his expensive golf polo was soaked with nervous perspiration. He looked small, weak, and entirely pathetic. His older brother, Uncle Gary, stepped right into his face. Gary had worked 40 years as a union pipe fitter, a career my father openly mocked as blue-collar mediocrity. "You arrogant thief," Gary growled, pointing a thick, calloused finger at the chest of my father. You sat at my dining table last Thanksgiving bragging about your stock portfolio. You told me I needed to work harder to provide for my family. Meanwhile, you are running an illegal shakedown on your own flesh and blood to pay off loan sharks. You are a disgusting disgrace, Thomas. You are nothing but a cheap con artist in an expensive suit. I want every single penny back, or I swear I will make sure you face a judge. Thomas tried to formulate a response, but his throat was completely dry. He swallowed hard, looking around for anyone who might defend him. There was no one. The entire extended family was actively giving statements to the police detailing how Thomas and Pamela had manipulated them. The social hierarchy he had spent decades building was entirely decimated. The intense public pressure finally shattered the fragile alliance between my parents. The toxic family unit turned on itself the moment they realized they had absolutely no scapegoat left to blame. I had removed myself from their blast radius, and Jamal was currently sitting in the back of a police cruiser in handcuffs. They were forced to face the ugly reality of their own disastrous choices. Pamela rounded on Thomas, her face contorted in vicious desperation. She jabbed her finger into his shoulder, her voice shrill and accusatory. "This is all your fault," she screamed, completely ignoring the police officer standing just 10 feet away. "You are the one who let Jamal marry into this family. I told you he was a shady loser from the start. You wanted Brittany to have a flashy real estate husband to brag about at the country club. You pushed for this marriage, Thomas. You let that criminal drag your daughter into massive gambling debt. You ruined us," Thomas snapped. The crushing humiliation broke his normally composed facade. He shoved her hand away, his face dark purple with rage. "Do not you dare put this on me, Pamela!" he roared right back at her. "You have spoiled Brittany since the day she was born. You never told her no. You funded her ridiculous lifestyle and covered up every single mistake she ever made. When she told us Jamal owed $45,000 to dangerous criminals, you were the one who suggested we charge the family for this fake retreat. You devised the pricing tiers, Pamela. You sent the payment requests. You are the one who decided we could use the property of Sydney to pull off a felony scam. You ruined us because you refused to let your precious golden child face reality." The argument echoed across the debris field. The relatives stopped giving their police statements to watch my parents viciously tear each other apart. Brittany was still sitting in the mud, rocking back and forth, crying about her ruined life. Jamal was locked in the cruiser. The police were busy logging evidence of massive wire fraud. The entire foundation of their lives was entirely eradicated. They had lost their money, their reputations, their social standing, and their freedom. Aunt Susan, furious beyond measure, turned her attention away from my screaming parents and addressed the lead sheriff directly. "Officer, I want to press charges for wire fraud," she demanded, holding up her phone as proof. "They took my money under false pretenses. They crossed state lines with a premeditated plan to steal from their own family." The other relatives immediately chimed in, raising their hands and stepping forward to file their own formal reports. "We want to press charges, too," Uncle Gary shouted. "Arrest them both right now." Pamela stopped screaming at Thomas. She looked at the flashing police lights illuminating the crushed drywall. She looked at her furious siblings demanding her immediate arrest. She looked at the severed padlock resting in the dirt. A sudden desperate realization washed over her face. She was completely out of options. She had no money, no leverage, and no escape route. The only person who possessed the wealth and the legal authority to potentially stop this absolute nightmare was the daughter she had spent 30 years treating like garbage. Pamela reached into her designer handbag with trembling fingers. She pulled out her smartphone, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped the device into the mud. She navigated to her contacts and pressed my name. Inside my quiet, temperature-controlled penthouse, my cell phone illuminated the marble counter. I watched Pamela on the high-definition monitor pacing nervously in the dirt, holding the phone tightly to her ear. I accepted the call on the first ring. I did not speak a single word. I watched her on the screen and simply waited. The line was dead silent for 3 agonizing seconds. I could hear the ragged, uneven breathing of my mother echoing through the receiver of my phone. When she finally spoke, her voice was completely unrecognizable. It was stripped entirely of the arrogant authority she had weaponized against me for my entire life. "Sydney, She gasped, the sound cracking in the middle of my name. Sydney, please, you have to help us. I watched her on the security feed. She had turned away from the crowd huddling near the side mirror of the Lexus like a frightened child. I remained perfectly silent, letting her drown in the awkward, heavy pause. You work in finance, Pamela pleaded, the desperation leaking out of every syllable. You are a senior wealth manager. You have the money, Sydney. I know you have it. Please just wire me $20,000 right now. I can refund your aunts and uncles immediately. I can pay them back right here in the driveway. If I do not give them their cash back right this second, they are going to press federal fraud charges against your father and me. You heard Susan. She is not bluffing, Sydney. They are going to have us arrested. Still, I said nothing. The absolute silence from my end of the phone was pushing her further into a frantic panic. She began to rapidly cycle through her usual manipulation tactics, shifting from begging to aggressive guilt-tripping. Sydney, say something, Pamela demanded, her voice rising an octave. You cannot do this to us. We are your family. We are your blood. You cannot just sit in your fancy penthouse and let your own sister watch her husband go to jail. Jamal made a mistake, but he is family. You cannot let your parents be sued by our own relatives. Do you have any idea what this will do to our reputation? Our friends at the country club will read about this in the local papers. Your father could lose his pension. You have the power to stop this nightmare right now. Just transfer the funds and we will pay you back. I promise we will pay you back every single cent. We will figure out a payment plan. Just do the right thing, Sydney. Be the bigger person and save your family. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather desk chair, resting my fingers lightly against the cool marble of my kitchen island. I looked at the high-definition monitor, watching Thomas literally sweating through his expensive golf shirt while Aunt Susan screamed in his face. My voice, when I finally spoke, was ice-cold and razor-sharp. Mom, do you remember my college graduation? I asked calmly. Pamela stuttered, caught completely off guard by the pivot. What? She stammered. Sydney, what does that have to do with anything? Do you remember what you texted me when I asked for a tiny loan to help pay off my student debt? I continued, my tone dropping to a lethal whisper. You and Dad had just bought Brittany a brand new Mercedes for her birthday because she managed to pass a community college communications class. I had just graduated magna cum laude with a double major in finance and economics. I asked for a $2,000 loan to cover my final tuition payment so I could accept my entry-level corporate job in the city. You sent me a text message, Mom. I kept it. I look at it every single time I need motivation. Pamela stopped pacing. She froze, staring blankly at the dirt. You typed exactly 8 words, I reminded her, refusing to let her escape the memory. You said failures do not belong in this family. Then you told me to figure it out myself. I watched Pamela swallow hard, her hand gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles turned stark white. Sydney, that was years ago, she pleaded, her voice weak and trembling. I was just trying to teach you independence. I was trying to push you to succeed. You pushed me right out of the family. Mom, I corrected her sharply. You made it abundantly clear that your love and financial support were exclusively reserved for your golden child. You funded the entire lifestyle of Brittany while I worked 80-hour weeks eating cheap instant noodles in a tiny studio apartment to build my career. You bet everything on the wrong daughter, Pamela. You invested your entire life into a girl who married a fraudulent con artist. And now you expect the daughter you discarded to foot the bill for your massive failure. Well, figure it out yourself. Pamela completely broke down. The sound of her sobbing through the phone was pathetic. Sydney, I am so sorry, she cried, the tears streaming down her face and ruining her expensive makeup. I am so sorry for how we treated you. You are right. We were wrong. You are the successful one. We respect you, Sydney. We are so proud of everything you have accomplished. Just please give us a second chance. If you wire the money, we will invite you to Thanksgiving. We will make you the guest of honor. We will treat you with the respect you deserve. We will give you a seat at the table. I promise things will be different. The sheer audacity of her offering me a seat at a table she no longer owned was laughable. She was attempting to sell me a ticket to a fantasy that had just been publicly demolished. "I do not need a seat at your table anymore, Mom," I said, my voice ringing with absolute finality. "I bought the whole building." The silence on the other end was absolute. Pamela finally understood that she possessed exactly zero leverage. The fake apologies, the empty promises, the desperate appeals to family loyalty, they all crashed against a brick wall of my making. There was no emotional manipulation left in her arsenal that could possibly breach my defenses. I had spent years forging my independence and building my wealth specifically to ensure I would never have to rely on their toxic approval ever again. "Now here is what is actually going to happen," I stated, leaning forward and staring directly at her panicked face on the security monitor. "Vanguard Holdings, LLC has a corporate attorney on retainer. He is currently drafting the formal paperwork to file civil damages against Jamal for the broken chain link fence, the severed commercial padlock, and the unauthorized trespassing on an active construction zone. We will be seeking maximum financial restitution for the perimeter breach." Pamela gasped, a horrible rattling sound escaping her throat. "Sydney, you cannot do that," she wailed. "He is already being arrested. You will completely destroy him." "He destroyed himself," I corrected coldly. "I am simply holding him legally accountable for destroying private corporate property. Furthermore, my security cameras have recorded every single second of this interaction. If the police need video evidence to corroborate the wire fraud statements of Aunt Susan and Uncle Gary, I will happily provide the high-definition footage directly to the district attorney." Pamela let out a piercing, terrified scream. "No, Sydney, please wait!" she shrieked, her voice breaking into a hysterical pitch. But I was already done. I pressed the red button on my screen and disconnected the call, leaving my mother screaming frantically into a completely dead line. I sat back in my chair watching the grand finale unfold on the monitor. Pamela slowly lowered the silent phone from her ear. Her face was a mask of absolute sheer horror. She looked across the dirt driveway at Thomas. Thomas was currently surrounded by 3 serious police officers. The lead sheriff held a small notepad in one hand and a pair of heavy steel handcuffs in the other. Aunt Susan stood behind the officers, pointing an accusing finger directly at the chest of my father. Thomas Wilson, the lead officer, announced, his voice loud enough to be captured perfectly by my exterior microphones. "Based on the multiple sworn statements provided by these individuals and the digital transfer receipts we have reviewed, you and your wife are being formally detained on suspicion of felony wire fraud and commercial extortion." Thomas shook his head, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. 2 officers stepped forward, grabbing his arms and spinning him around. They slammed him against the side of his own luxury vehicle, pulling his arms behind his back. The sharp click of the handcuffs echoed across the yard. Pamela dropped her designer handbag into the mud. She took one step toward Thomas before a female officer intercepted her. "Pamela Wilson," the officer stated, grabbing my mother by the wrists. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." I smiled, sipping my coffee. The sweet sting of justice was finally served right in front of me. 3 weeks passed since the flashing cherry lights of the local police cruisers illuminated the Rhode Island dirt. The aftermath of the Lake House perimeter breach was absolutely catastrophic for the Wilson family. The local prosecutor had zero tolerance for commercial trespassing and felony wire fraud, especially when the evidence was neatly packaged and delivered in high-definition video format directly to his desk. Jamal was currently sitting in a cold concrete holding cell at the county jail, wearing a bright orange jumpsuit that completely clashed with his previous expensive aesthetic. He was entirely unable to make bail because his credit was frozen and his assets were practically non-existent. The smug real estate broker persona had vanished the moment the heavy iron bars slid shut, locking him away from the luxury world he had pretended to inhabit. He spent his days pacing the small cell, begging for a public defender to negotiate a plea deal that would keep him out of state prison. Brittany was faring no better in the wake of the total destruction. The leasing office followed through on their threat with ruthless efficiency and zero sympathy for her dramatic tears. She was formally evicted from her luxury downtown penthouse, and her belongings were unceremoniously dumped on the sidewalk by indifferent movers. She was currently living out of a cheap motel situated directly next to a noisy interstate highway. Her perfectly curated Instagram lifestyle was completely dead. She tried posting a few heavily filtered selfies from the motel bathroom, but her followers quickly noticed the cracked tiles, the cheap fluorescent lighting, and the peeling yellow wallpaper. The corporate sponsors dropped her immediately, and the silence on her social media feed was deafening. She had no money, no husband to exploit, and absolutely no glamorous backdrop to fake her success. She was reduced to eating cheap microwave dinners and avoiding the gaze of the motel manager when her weekly payment was inevitably late. The golden child was finally experiencing the harsh reality of the real world without her parents serving as a financial shield. The extended family did not forgive, and they certainly did not forget the monumental betrayal. Aunt Susan had organized the relatives into a ruthless legal coalition that operated with military precision. They filed a brutal class action civil suit against Thomas and Pamela for the fake vacation scam. Uncle Gary spearheaded the communication, ensuring that every single aunt, uncle, and cousin who wired money to Pamela was listed as an active plaintiff in the massive lawsuit. The sheer volume of evidence against my parents was insurmountable. They had digital receipts, text messages detailing the specific fraud, and the public police reports from the demolition site. To pay their rapidly mounting legal fees, and to scrape together the required funds to refund the furious relatives, Thomas and Pamela were forced to make the ultimate humiliating sacrifice. They had to list their sprawling suburban colonial home for sale. It was the exact same house where they used to host extravagant Sunday dinners just to mock me. It was the house where my father held court in his mahogany study, degrading my career choices while praising Brittany for simply existing. Now, a massive bright red for sale sign was hammered into the manicured front lawn for everyone to see. The wealthy neighbors they had spent decades trying to impress watched in hushed amusement as discount moving trucks hauled away their expensive furniture to pay for criminal defense attorneys. Before putting the house on the market, Thomas had desperately tried to salvage his crumbling empire. He walked into his local bank branches, wearing his best tailored suits, trying to secure a second mortgage to cover the legal bills and keep the house. He thought his arrogant charm and his history as a seemingly successful manager would easily smooth over the loan officers. He believed his sheer confidence could manifest a massive cash loan despite his terrible circumstances. He was violently mistaken. The bank rejected his application immediately, without even a second glance. When Thomas angrily demanded an explanation, threatening to pull his accounts, the bank manager slid a thick manila folder across the mahogany desk. The comprehensive background check revealed a dark financial secret that Thomas had managed to hide from everyone, including Pamela. Over the past 5 years, Thomas had secretly co-signed 3 different massive personal loans for Brittany. He had leveraged his own pristine credit to fund her designer handbags, her European vacations, and her lavish wedding to Jamal. He had bought into the golden child illusion so deeply that he literally mortgaged his own future to maintain her fake status. Every single one of those massive loans was now in severe default. The aggressive creditors were constantly circling, calling the house at all hours of the night, demanding immediate payment. His secret decisions had completely destroyed his financial credibility and left him drowning in unmanageable debt. Thomas and Pamela were entirely financially ruined by the very golden child they had sworn to protect at all costs. They had sacrificed my mental health and my financial stability to elevate Brittany, and she had rewarded them by dragging them directly into absolute bankruptcy. The colonial house was sold at a heavy loss, and the proceeds barely covered the initial legal settlements and the outstanding loan defaults. They were facing total social exile from the community they loved. Their prestigious country club memberships were revoked due to unpaid dues, and their wealthy friends stopped answering their calls, wanting absolutely nothing to do with confessed fraudsters who stole from their own blood relatives. The glittering social life Pamela had spent decades cultivating evaporated overnight, leaving them alone in a tiny rented apartment on the wrong side of town. They sat in cheap plastic chairs staring at the bare walls, wondering how their perfect plan had resulted in such total devastation. The golden child illusion was dead, and they were left holding the ashes of their former lives without any hope of redemption. Completely bankrupt and stripped of his patriarchal authority, Thomas attempted a final desperate resort. He had no savings, no home, and a wife who bitterly blamed him for their spectacular downfall. The crushing reality of his absolute failure finally broke through his stubborn pride. He traveled into the busy city on a bleak Tuesday morning. He did not drive his least luxury vehicle because it had been repossessed the previous week by a towing company in the middle of the night. He took the crowded commuter train, sitting next to the very working-class people he used to openly despise. He was dressed in an ill-fitting, outdated gray suit that hung loosely on his rapidly shrinking frame. The confident stride he used to command the room was completely gone, replaced by a hesitant, shuffling walk. He navigated the bustling city streets, slowly looking up at the towering glass skyscrapers that housed the elite financial sector. He walked directly into the grand marble lobby of Vanguard Holdings LLC, feeling incredibly small and entirely out of place in the sleek, modern environment. He approached the polished reception desk, his hands trembling as he spoke to the security staff, trying to maintain a shred of dignity. He was a desperate, broken man, looking for a lifeline from the daughter he had spent his entire life emotionally abusing and professionally dismissing. I was exiting an executive board meeting at my corporate office. I was walking down the plush carpeted hallway discussing the quarterly revenue projections with my chief operating officer. The environment was electric with success and absolute control. Every decision I made shaped the future of the company and cemented my position as an elite leader in the industry. My smartphone vibrated quietly in the pocket of my blazer. I pulled it out and saw a priority notification. My receptionist immediately paged me over the secure internal communication system. Her voice was professional, but carried a distinct note of confusion and genuine urgency. "Ms. Sidney," she announced through the crisp speaker. "I deeply apologize for the sudden interruption, but your father is down here in the main lobby. He is causing a bit of a scene near the security turnstiles. He says he desperately needs a job or a personal loan. He looks incredibly distressed and is refusing to leave. He says he will not step foot outside this building until he speaks directly to you. The security team is currently monitoring the situation, but they are waiting for your explicit instructions on how to proceed. He keeps repeating that he has made a terrible mistake and that he knows you are the only one who can save him from absolute ruin. Should I have the guards escort him off the property, or do you wish to handle this personally?" I stopped walking and looked out the massive floor-to-ceiling window at the sprawling city skyline below, taking a deep breath. "Tell him no right now," I replied. My chief operating officer raised an eyebrow but remained perfectly silent, recognizing the absolute finality in my tone. I handed him the quarterly revenue reports and instructed him to proceed with the merger meeting without me. I needed to handle a minor security issue downstairs. I walked toward the private executive elevators. I pressed the button for the lobby. The mirrored doors slid shut. As the elevator descended 60 floors, my heart rate remained completely steady. There was only a profound sense of clinical detachment. For 30 years, I had craved the approval of the man waiting at the bottom of this building. I had bent over backward, sacrificing my own mental peace to fit into his rigid definition of a worthy daughter. Now he was a desperate stranger standing in my lobby, begging for a fraction of the success I built entirely without his help. The elevator chimed softly, announcing my arrival at the ground floor. The doors parted, revealing the grand marble expanse of Vanguard Holdings. I did not invite Thomas upstairs into my domain. I stepped out into the bustling public atrium, projecting absolute authority. Thomas was pacing nervously near the security turnstiles. He looked absolutely broken. The crisp, expensive tailoring he had always worn was gone. He wore a rumpled, ill-fitting jacket. The lines on his face were carved deep. When he spotted me walking across the polished marble, his eyes widened with a desperate, frantic hope. "Sidney," he called out, taking a quick step forward. Two security guards immediately stepped into his path, blocking his access to the employee sector. I raised a hand signaling the guards to let him speak, but to hold their positions. Thomas cleared his throat, straightening his tie in a pathetic attempt to summon his old domineering presence. He tried to put on his authoritative patriarch voice. "Sydney, we need to talk business," he declared. "I have reviewed my current portfolio, and I am seeking a strategic transition. I need a senior management position at your firm. My vast executive experience would be a tremendous asset to your operations. Or alternatively, a small personal loan. A minor bridge of $50,000 just to get your mother and me back on our feet. You can draft the promissory note yourself. It is a solid investment, Sydney. We are blood. We take care of our own." I stood perfectly still, letting his desperate, pathetic pitch hang in the cold air of the corporate lobby. I looked at Thomas, analyzing him with the same ruthless precision I used to evaluate failing corporate acquisitions. I denied him flatly. "You do not have a portfolio anymore, Thomas," I stated, my voice resonating with chilling clarity. "You have a mountain of debt, a trail of federal fraud charges, and a completely ruined reputation. You are standing in the lobby of my company demanding a bailout and trying to disguise it as a business opportunity. Let us break down your actual financial performance. You did not fail because of a bad economy or bad luck, Dad. You failed because you made a catastrophic series of conscious investments. You took your pristine credit, your savings, and your entire social standing, and you invested all of it into a highly toxic asset. You poured every single resource you possessed into Brittany." I stepped half a pace closer, forcing him to hear every single syllable. "You secretly co-signed 3 massive loans for a golden child who never possessed the ability to generate a single return. You funded her fraudulent wedding, her fake luxury lifestyle, and her inevitable demise. Meanwhile, you actively shorted the only asset in your entire portfolio that actually yielded tangible returns. You shorted me. You bet heavily against my success. You mocked my career, you isolated me from the family, and you explicitly told me I was a failure who did not belong. In finance, we call that catastrophic portfolio mismanagement. Vanguard Holdings does not bail out bad investments." Thomas flinched as if I had physically struck him. The fake confidence completely evaporated, leaving only a trembling, terrified old man. "But Sydney," he stammered, a tear actually spilling over his eyelashes. "I am your father. I am family. Vanguard Holdings does not bail out bad investments." I repeated, my tone completely devoid of empathy. "You made your high-risk trades, Thomas. Now you have to absorb the total loss. I have 0 positions left in your life." The reality of his absolute destruction finally crashed down on him. He was completely out of options. His golden child was ruined. His wife despised him. His house was gone. And the scapegoat he had tormented was now the untouchable CEO, denying him a single penny. "No, Sydney, please," he sobbed. He lunged forward, reaching out with trembling hands to grab my forearm. He wanted to physically force me to listen. He realized for the very first time in his life that his power over me was entirely eradicated. I took a swift, deliberate step backward. The 2 security guards immediately stepped in, placing their massive frames between me and my father. "Sir, you need to leave the premises right now," the lead guard commanded, placing a firm hand on the chest of Thomas. "Do not make us forcibly remove you." I did not say another word. I simply turned my back on the pathetic, sobbing man being detained by my security team. I walked smoothly toward the private executive elevator, my head held incredibly high. I stepped inside, pressed the button, and watched the mirrored doors slide shut, leaving him completely alone in the lobby. The narrative moves forward exactly 6 months. The bitter chill of that chaotic winter was completely burned away by a glorious, bright summer afternoon. I drove down the winding gravel driveway leading up to my property. I took a deep breath of the crisp summer air. The perimeter was now secured by a heavy wrought iron gate and a state-of-the-art digital security system. My lake house was fully rebuilt. It was no longer an active demolition site littered with broken chain-link fences and the remnants of a felony scam. It was a stunning modern architectural masterpiece. The sleek dark wood exterior blended perfectly with the surrounding forest, while massive floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking, unobstructed view of the shimmering water. Today, I was hosting a massive summer barbecue on the property, but the guest list was entirely different. There were no toxic aunts demanding private yacht tours. There were no manipulative uncles evaluating my net worth. The guests filling my backyard were my chosen family. My chief operating officer was manning the professional outdoor grill, laughing loudly. My closest friends from college were lounging on the plush patio furniture sipping craft cocktails. The mentors who had guided me through the vicious corporate ranks were chatting happily near the fire pit. These were the people who genuinely valued my worth. They supported my ambitions, celebrated my victories, and respected my boundaries. I walked through the open sliding glass doors, stepping out onto the pristine mahogany deck. The late afternoon sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the sky in brilliant shades of crushed violet and burning gold. The warm summer breeze carried the sweet, rich scent of roasting cedar wood and freshly grilled vegetables. I stood near the sleek glass railing, holding a chilled glass of crisp white wine, absorbing the vibrant, joyful atmosphere of my actual home. Laughter echoed across the lawn, harmonizing with the gentle, rhythmic lapping of the lake water against the dock. For a brief, fleeting moment, my mind flickered to the people who were not here. I knew Jamal was currently serving a lengthy sentence in a state penitentiary, unable to charm his way past a relentless federal prosecutor. I knew Brittany was working a minimum-wage retail job while living in a cramped studio apartment located directly next to a noisy interstate highway. I knew my parents were drowning in endless litigation, completely exiled from the only social circles they ever cared about. But the thought brought me no anger and no lingering resentment. It brought me absolute profound indifference. My cell phone vibrated softly deep inside my pocket. I pulled the device out and glanced at the illuminated screen. It was an automated push notification from my primary wealth management software. The alert flashed with a bright green upward arrow showing my personal investment portfolio hitting a massive new all-time high. I smiled quietly to myself, taking a very slow and incredibly satisfying long sip of my chilled white wine. I pressed the power button, turning off the phone completely and sliding it away. I turned my back to the setting sun and walked eagerly back toward the roaring laughter of my chosen family. I was finally completely free from the bitter ghosts of my past. The ultimate sweet revenge was simply my own spectacular, entirely unbothered success.